Our topic for today is the alignment and integration of social emotional learning and restorative practices within a PBIS framework. I thought this morning we should really just take a quick pause and acknowledge our current reality. I think sometimes when we join professional development or meetings for work, I don't know about you, but for the better part of 13, 14 months now, my work has primarily been in this way, connecting via Zoom, whether it's providing coaching, technical assistance, or professional development. And I want us to just start today with a deep breath, acknowledging how we might be feeling and putting our work into context. We are, again, 13 months into a global pandemic. In this last year, not only have we been trying to navigate the ins and outs of supporting schools in the midst of this crisis, we've also had political unrest, we've had civil unrest, we've been face to face with systematic racism and the fallout of all of these really three traumatic events in our country. And I want us to think about that as we come into the content for today. I know and appreciate that words matter, language matters. There are lots of terms and certainly acronyms that we use in our work. I've tried to be deliberate in spelling out acronyms in the PowerPoint slides. Some of these terms end up getting used interchangeably. Things like social emotional learning, behavior supports, mental health, positive behavior intervention and supports, and multi-tiered systems of support. You might call these things different words or acronyms in your setting. Certainly know that as our work is evolving through research and what we're learning in the literature, we are trying to be mindful of the terminology that we use as we support states, districts, and schools to put together the plans that they have for supporting students and their needs. One thing that we're finding as a silver lining of this last year is that in schools and in education, things like addressing trauma, addressing mental health of adults and students, and deliberately addressing social emotional learning as a priority in education are getting more attention. That's great news. We also are excited, if that could be said, about the fact that we're moving away from clinicians or mental health experts being seen as the ones who are going to solve all the problems or wave their magic wand, to knowing that we need teams of people and all hands on deck in order to be able to address the social, emotional, behavioral, and mental health needs for all students. Early on in the pandemic, so think back to last March, quickly schools had to bring to mind the public health logic. We had to think about how do we find ways to make sure that students and families were safe, make sure that they had access to technology, make sure that they had access to food. And so that public health model led us to the use of another triangle, which is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? How did we in our school communities make sure that basic needs were met? And how did we then find ways to foster care and connection to students, to teachers, to families, and our larger school community? And so today we know that it's never been more clear that mental health and social emotional learning our top priorities. We have to find ways to systematically manage anxiety, depression, and the impact of trauma in order to be able to help students learn academic curriculum. We know that these comprehensive systems are going to need to be flexible to meet the needs of students, staff, and families in the current context. And that context shifted over time in this last school year. You might have went from virtual learning to hybrid learning to in-person learning and back again. And things now look different than they did 6 months ago, 8 months ago, 12 months ago. We know that data and science matter, and we need to use those systems of data and science to direct resources for effective supports, and prevention and early intervention pay off. So how can we identify early those students who have need? And above all, how do we prioritize people and our relationships in order to affect and impact change? The data on this slide is data that we had prior to COVID-19. Suicide, second leading cause of death among young people. Knowing that about 20% of all children and youth need additional support for social, emotional, behavioral, and mental health needs. We know that prior to COVID-19, school was the de facto mental health provider, followed by the juvenile justice system. And we know that with this pandemic, and as we start to come out of it, those needs are going to be even greater. This graphic and this information comes from a report put together by the Washington State System of Education, built off of some information out of the Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration, or SAMHSA. And so what it tells us is that we can predict, because of these crises that we have experienced in the last year, that we are going to see increases in anxiety, depression, and the need for social skill instruction, coping skill instruction, and problem-solving strategies for kids and adults in our schools. We also know that if we don't have a framework, we're not going to be able to simply add more people or add curriculum and think it's going to resolve our needs. A framework with teams using data for decisions, coaches, professional development, technical assistance, we're not going to be able to see good impact with our efforts. So there aren't going to be any quick fixes. There aren't going to be enough people that we can hire without changing our system. And again, I'm not saying that more people won't help. Certainly, no one would argue that adding, for example, social workers, psychologists, and counselors into our school systems, or better partnering with community mental health providers, won't be helpful. First of all, though, what we know is there aren't enough of these people to go around, and we're not going to solve this one person at a time or one kid at a time. We've got to look at our systems and make them work for us. Simply purchasing a new curriculum in and of itself won't be sufficient. We have to use our data to determine what practices and interventions will best meet our needs, and whether we need those interventions and curriculums at Tier 3 or Tier 2 or Tier 1 in our multi-tiered system of support. Simply training our staff, whether that's on trauma or implicit bias or whatever it is that you think that they need more professional development around, in and of itself will not be sufficient. We can't simply train and hope. We've got to follow up that training with coaching, technical assistance, and again, the use of data. And so one big idea here is that mental health or social emotional learning or behavior supports, it's everyone's job. Principals and instructional leaders, family members and parents and caregivers, teachers, paraprofessionals, the lunch staff, custodians, people who work in the front office of the school. We all need to work together to create a safe, caring, positive, consistent environment where we are not stigmatizing mental health challenges, where we're all watching for warning signs, and that we embed competencies, social, emotional, and behavioral supports into all aspects of the curriculum. And we're going to talk more about that here in just a little bit. We also need to break down silos of service delivery, increasing the confidence and competence of all staff, and ensuring that we are not meeting on one day to talk about bully prevention, and the next day to talk about suicide prevention, and the next day to talk about social emotional learning. We have to think about what we've learned in this last year and how to get more effective and efficient in meeting the needs of all students. There is going to be variability, not only state to state and county by county, but even within the same community. It's possible that there's been impact from these various crises in one school and then a different impact in the school across the street or across town. And so we have to take all of that into context. Some students responded well to distance learning, and the stress and pressure of being in a school made it easier for them to learn remotely. For other students, it didn't work for them to learn in a remote or hybrid environment, and they really needed that context and structure of being inside a school building. We know that we all can learn and we can teach wellness and resilience and skills that benefit all. We know more than ever we have to partner with families and build those school, family, community partnerships and relationships. And so I'm not sure that any of these concepts are new to us, but what we need to do is be deliberate, be intentional, focus on true collaboration and cross-system communication. And so we really want to focus on investing in a culture of wellness from state to district to school to classroom to student. And you'll find many of these resources in the Return to School Guidance. And again, you can find an entire page at pbis.org of resources, tips, strategies, and things that you can do in your school community to improve on these concepts. Throughout this presentation, you'll find hyperlinks to a lot of new technical assistance briefs that are quick guides that offer strategies and ideas that you can use in your school and district, like this one here, which is about building a culture of staff wellness through multi-tiered systems of support. We have to start with our adults. We need to focus on their social emotional learning, their ability to utilize pro-social skills, coping strategies, and problem-solving skills that they can not only model for students, but also teach directly. And so again, you'll find these ideas around phases of recovery, whether you're still in crisis response or initial recovery, and what you can do to plan as you begin to think about the next school year, and how you can focus on what's gone well for you in this last year, and when and where you need to bolster what you're doing to respond and to promote that prevention and early intervention as you move forward. The other piece of this is we have to find opportunities to align, integrate, and even perhaps eliminate ineffective strategies. And that's going to require you to examine the types of initiatives, interventions, and practices that you have in place at this time. Because what we know is that all of you have a lot on your plates, and you're trying to address these related initiatives, and you've got to think about, now more than ever, how to efficiently and effectively establish one social, emotional, academic framework. And what we're learning in the literature is using that multi-tiered system of support is the way to have accurate, durable, and scalable implementation. It is the service delivery framework grounded in that public health model of prevention and early intervention, and helps us build a continuum of evidence-based practices that's based on data and helps us support student needs. I want to give you now the example of restorative practices. Restorative practices are not yet in and of themselves an evidence-based practice. The literature is emerging, and there are kernels of really great strategies. And what we mean by that is, if you use restorative practices, you're going to see some desired effect. And so you want to tie those strategies to what you're already doing in the classroom and in your schools. And you can find really great classroom practice strategies in our materials at pbis.org, and you will find some modules at midwestpbis.org based on all of the recent literature. And so if you use those classroom practices as a springboard for embedding your restorative practice efforts, you're going to see enhanced outcomes or impact from your efforts. So for example, what is the classroom practice, and how does it help you create those nurturing environments where you have routines and procedures that include youth voice, that include staff voice, that help you get to the place where, if you're going to have a morning circle, you can clearly articulate what your expectations are for that time or that setting, and what that looks like and sounds like for your students, and have them participate in creating those expectations. So whether you're talking about restorative practices or addressing substance use and abuse in your schools or community, or the impact of trauma, or teaching social emotional learning, you will find technical assistance briefs, those strategies and recommendations for how to embed them in your multi-tiered system of support. What do I mean when I say multi-tiered system of support? This comes from McIntosh and Goodman's book on integrating academics and PBIS. And you'll notice that essentially there are these 6 core features of a multi-tiered system of support. Use teams. Have your teams look at local data. Use the data for decision-making and progress monitoring. Focus on fidelity of implementation and impact. Use universal screening. Have ongoing professional development and coaching. And if we're talking about social, emotional, and behavioral health and wellness, we can expand our teams to include mental health experts and SEL experts. We can expand our data to look beyond typical school data to incorporate community data. We can work with any professional who's delivering interventions to have a formal process for what we select and implement and how we monitor progress and outcomes. You can screen for not only acting out problem behavior, but also those students who might be suffering in silence with impact from trauma or anxiety and depression. all of this should be done with ongoing professional development, coaching, and technical assistance. And the reason we use the positive behavior intervention and supports multi-tiered system is because we have over 2 decades of research and evidence to demonstrate how it improves outcomes for students, outcomes for teachers, and reduces exclusionary discipline. And if we only talk about SEL without thinking about behavior, we're not making the connection of how sometimes depression, for example, in adolescence can show up as acting out problem behavior, or trauma can sometimes show up as behavior. And so we have to pay attention to social, emotional, and behavior. Again, there are resources on our website for helping you with your planning of returning to school, whether that's this spring or in the fall, and how to think about creating safe, predictable, consistent, positive environments, which if you're implementing PBIS to fidelity, you will be doing, and therefore you're setting up environments that help students who've been impacted by trauma. And so what are some of the recommendations? Reteach, remind, and get back to basics with your school-wide expectations. Reteach, remind, and get back to basics on classroom routines. Focus on relationships and the positive. Avoid punitive approaches. Get to know your students again. A lot has happened in this last year, and maybe there have been some changes. Look for signs that students might need more help. Re-engage families as partners, and do what works and do it well. So let's turn now to thinking about social emotional learning. This is Castle's definition. I'm not going to read this to you. I'm sure you can easily find this definition or others online, or may have expanded your own definition for your school community. We have a technical assistance brief that gives tips and strategies for how to embed teaching social emotional competencies within a PBIS framework. There are examples, including more in this presentation today, of how you might go about that at Tier 1 for all students. Because really what you want to do is find the ways that you can adjust and incorporate the work you're doing in either one of these initiatives so that it's aligned and integrated. You want to work together to create that prevention-focused, multi-tiered public health framework. It's the way, as I mentioned, that we know through research that we can have adequate implementation and improved outcomes. And PBIS provides us with the system to install and facilitate social emotional competencies. And that's really focusing on the whole child. I'm going to take a pause right now. We're getting close to the halfway point in our time. And I'm going to take a peek at if there have been any questions or comments in chat already. And I'd like you to reflect on these questions. Do you already use an SEL curriculum? If you do, who teaches the lessons? When and how are they taught? Do you start with lesson 1 or use data to decide which lessons? So let's get a little bit of dialogue going in chat as you think about currently what you're doing around social emotional learning in your schools. So I'm seeing the question, will we have access to the slides after the session? Yes, they will be posted on pbis.org along with the recording. So thank you for that question. And again, if you could take a moment to reflect on these questions that I just mentioned, And feel free to type in the chat whether or not you're using a curriculum, who teaches lessons, and how you would go about your efforts currently. All right, great. I'm seeing Katie say they use second step and also zones of regulation taught by teachers in the classroom 3 times a week, and that SEL is somewhat connected to school-wide expectations. That's excellent. Starting SEL in the fall in homerooms, wonderful. I love seeing in the chat lessons taught by classroom teachers. That really helps with transference and generalization of skills. It helps students recognize that it's important to their teachers and to the school because it's part of what's happening throughout their school day. Great. I'm seeing lots of excellent comments in the chat. I appreciate the participation. Okay, thank you. And again, if you have questions, feel free to type them in. If I don't get to them here during this next section of the content, I will take some time at the end to respond to your questions. So I want to turn now to helping you think about this piece on alignment and integration. The pictures on this slide, I actually took while taking a team of teachers on a field trip, so to speak, in their own school. And what they recognized is that they had PBIS in place, they were using a social emotional curriculum, and they had some other related interventions like bully prevention and a curriculum around that, and that these initiatives were related and yet they weren't connected. And so what you can see here and what they recognized was they had similar language, but it was different. And so that could be confusing not only to students, but also to adults. Which skill are we talking about? Which language should we use? And also, they had different committees, teams, or work groups who were focused on bully prevention, social emotional learning, and PBIS. And so they worked together to find ways to align and integrate their efforts. And so how do we think about moving from having our social, emotional, behavioral supports essentially being separate and apart from what we're doing in academics? We're going to have to, as I said, get efficient as we move forward. And so how do we move from having them be different parts of our multi-tiered system to aligned and integrated, incorporating lessons of coping skills, problem-solving strategies, and social skills into academics, whether that's physical education and health, or whether that's math or science. How can we invest in one framework to deliver and create healthy, well, young people and adults? And so that's really what we're talking about. How do we focus on systems change, right? I mentioned earlier, it's not going to be easy or quick. It's not going to be simply adding a curriculum or people. And so how do we go from those things, logic of let's hire an SEL coach to let's strengthen our teams, let's strengthen and boost what we're doing at Tier 1 and Tier 2, and build the capacity of all staff. Let's be sure if you're going to add a social emotional curriculum that you use data and a process to select the curriculum that best matches the need in your school community. Not simply asking your coach or technical assistance provider or doing a web search and say, this one is the cheapest, let's pick that. Use your data. Ensure that you have people in position to coach and provide technical assistance to those staff who will be teaching and delivering the lessons. And rather than starting on lesson 1, use your data to decide which lessons should be lifted from the curriculum and taught to all students. If you're going to train on trauma or other mental health literacy, make sure it's team-based. Make sure you have time to evaluate and follow up and follow through to see how that training changed practice, how that training led to identifying students who needed more support. And strengthen your partnerships with families and community providers, whether that's in your child serving systems like child welfare, juvenile justice, or mental health, or other community partners who might provide before and after childcare, or places where kids spend their time when they're not in school. Work together and gather community data to inform your efforts across tiers. And so really, that's our expanded multi-tiered logic. How we can expand our team, expand our data, and build a continuum of interventions that will match student need. What type of data might we be talking about? You probably already look at things like grades, discipline, attendance, and climate data. What about kids who go to the nurse frequently or did prior to COVID-19 or might now as you move back to in-person learning? And they're down there not to take a daily medicine, but because of somatic complaints, headaches, stomach aches. What about students who ask to go see the school counselor, social worker, or psychologist? How can we better uncover those students who have those internalizing needs? What about communities who've been impacted by COVID, either because of loss of life or loss of income? What about families who've been impacted by some of the recent civil unrest and political unrest? What about things that have happened in this last year that have led to families turning to going to the emergency room for a mental health crisis, or increases in substance use, domestic violence, or again, the real traumatic incidents that have occurred over these last 13 months and even before that? So how can we use this expanded lens to uncover where we need to begin teaching like we've done for academics? And that might be teaching all adults and students how to have some coping strategies that they can use as they come back to in-person learning. And so if we're thinking about our expectations and the skills, whether they're from a formal curriculum or not, they might be those that you've built together as part of your implementation. How do we teach that part of being safe means telling an adult when you're worried about a friend? How do we teach that being respectful makes sure that kids know how to ask for help or how to encourage their peers to use their voice? That being responsible means checking in with our own feelings and the feelings of others throughout the day. And so there's lots of ways that we can move from only teaching routines and procedures, which are important, to also teaching skills. And you're going to have to customize these to fit student and staff need. So here's some examples. This one was before COVID-19. You can see here, sometimes cafeterias were loud with lots of people, and we might have needed to teach coping skills to manage stress in that environment. Now, cafeterias look very different. Kids can't sit together. If they're not eating, they're wearing masks. There might be plastic shields up between them. And so we have to teach kids how to navigate that stressful environment in a different way. So we have to think about, what are our expectations? Where is the setting? And how do we incorporate not only routines and procedures, but also the ways for kids to have strategies for navigating that environment? We might be talking about addressing potential bullying behavior. And this comes from Scott Ross's work, Stop, Walk, Talk. And you can incorporate that for everyone and post it up on the wall so it's not seen as something separate and apart from what you're doing in PBIS or with SEL. Again, what are your expectations? Where is the setting? And how do we teach it and model it and practice it for all? Social media and technology. Kids are spending a lot of time, right, connected to their devices. And frankly, these expectations work really well for adults. Pause and reflect before you post. Check your feelings. Model for others. Double check your sources. Really, really great strategies. How do we teach, model, and practice these for all? So let's turn to that now. If you are planning kickoff events for kids returning to school, whether that's right now this spring or for next fall, you've got to be ready and have plans for in-person, hybrid, and virtual learning environments. We have to teach to families, students, and staff, pre-correcting, using our data, setting up time to embed things into our curriculum, provide booster training, especially if you have to close down for a little while because maybe there's been an increase in COVID cases, or it's going to be the summer holiday. You're going to need a booster in the fall. Think about different ways to share information, newsletters, websites, social media blasts, all of the different ways you can communicate. And let's think about how to get back to basics, do what works, and do it well. Connecting with family, with each other as staff and leaders, and with students. This actually came from my colleague, Susan Barrett. Big idea is, and you can tell these pictures were taken pre-pandemic. This faculty and staff put up pictures of every kid in their school. And then the adults went with little stickers and said, who among these kids do I know? Who do I have a connection with? Who could I say something about? And then they looked at the pictures and said, do we have any students who aren't connected to adults? And let's intervene. You might have seen the clever ways prior to COVID-19 that teachers were greeting students and forming connections. That has to change now, right? We've spent a lot of time interacting with students looking like this, with a mask on our face. And so how do we adjust now? I don't know if you saw this video, but we can still find ways to connect with kids and greet them at the door. How do we screen and think about those students that we need to find and uncover and connect to intervention early? And that might look different now, right? There is guidance at pbis.org, another TA brief on considerations for remote and hybrid learning. There's also a document on best practices for universal screening. That document was put together pre-pandemic. All universal screeners were not normed for a pandemic. We're working on updating that document with a new version for that consideration. But in the meantime, here's some tips. If you're not using a universal screening, this might not be the time to start. Instead, survey students, survey families, look to other data points. And if you are using a screening instrument, get guidance on how to adapt it if students aren't in face-to-face instruction, and use youth and family report options if they're available. Support. Now more than ever, we need to increase our opportunities for praise and for acknowledging students who are doing the right thing. We want to avoid punishment, especially for things like mask wearing. If students aren't adhering to social distancing guidelines, let's prompt and pre-correct and reteach when needed rather than punish for that type of behavior. There are samples and resources available for thinking about matrices for families at home. This one has hyperlinks with other resources and information for parents and families. There are examples of hybrid learning matrices and the ways to think about helping parents set up and remind and reteach expectations at home and reinforce SEL lessons as well. So I encourage you to check out those resources as you begin to adapt your materials for this spring or the start of the next school year. Teaching, again, how do you embed social emotional lessons into your daily instruction? How do you incorporate them into your restorative circles or community meetings? How do you think about using interventions like check-in, check-out, and the daily progress report to incorporate the skills that are going to be taught in small groups, whether that's for generic social skills or it's skills being taught in a group for students who've been impacted by trauma? And then you have to monitor, both for fidelity and for impact. Are we doing what we said we were going to do? Are we looking at our data to see if kids are improving? And that might mean that something is increasing or decreasing. Improved attendance, improved grades, less visits to the nurse, less office discipline referrals, less incidents of crying, more opportunities that a student participates in class or in groups. You get the idea. Use check-in, check-out as the organizer as you move into Tier 2 and Tier 3. That daily progress report helps with progress monitoring. You can use it to show teachers and parents and as a reminder to students of the lessons they're learning in small group instruction. There is guidance also in another TA brief on how to adapt check-in, check-out for distance learning. That might be a helpful resource for you. Think about in your continuum of interventions at Tier 2, the types of groups that you might either already have in place or need to add to your continuum based on data. Some of those groups can be facilitated by any adult in your school. You don't have to have a clinical degree to reteach basic social and coping skills. We do need to reserve and preserve our clinicians like social workers, psychologists, and counselors to facilitate those groups where we're using evidence-based curriculum to address anxiety, depression, and trauma. So what are some potential next steps for you? First of all, please take care of yourself. We are all still in a pandemic, still wrestling with issues of equity and gun violence and systematic racism and lots of challenging systemic issues in our country. And we need you now more than ever. So do what you need to do to take care of yourself now and this summer. Take a break, have a rest, recharge your batteries. Examine with your leadership what you're doing in your school or district, what you're doing well, and what you might need to boost or adjust. Decide what the next best steps will be. Create an action plan and use caution in adding something new without examining your current systems, data, and practices. You might find some of these resources available on our website to be very helpful in that planning. As you assess what you're doing, you could think about this companion guide for the tiered fidelity inventory, whether you're trying to embed social emotional competencies, better address mental health, focus on restorative practices, emphasize cultural responsiveness. All of that is woven into this companion guide. This tool, the initiative inventory, is an opportunity for you to have a conversation with your leadership around the various related initiatives you have in place and whether or not you're getting desired outcomes and what you might need to do differently to boost those initiatives as you move forward. Using something like the Hexagon tool from the National Implementation Science Research Network could be a helpful way for your leadership to decide what SEL curriculum to use. If you should start a new initiative, what type of universal screener might be best for your school or district? And so this might be another helpful tool or resource for you. So in summary, do a few things really, really well. Use your school community data. This is not the time for new initiatives. And remember, please take care of yourselves. I want to go over a couple of more resources and opportunities. Then I'm going to pause again to respond to questions. First of all, I want to let you all know that we have a save the date for our annual PBIS Leadership Implementers Forum. It will be virtual October 26th through 28th, and more information will be coming out soon, including how and when you can start to register. There is a wellness social media campaign going on right now. You can follow us at the Center on PBIS on Twitter. We are also on Facebook and Instagram. And please use the hashtag SchoolWellnessPBIS if you want to get involved in this campaign. You will find 2 videos online if you want to learn more about how to align and integrate your social, emotional, behavioral health and wellness initiatives in your state, district, or school. These videos are short and might help you as you take back some of this information to use. And maybe you've already seen the new handbook from the Department of Education that gives some other resources on reopening safely and meeting all students' needs. You'll find some of the resources that I have mentioned today and some other great information for you to consider as you continue your planning this spring and also gearing up for the next school year. So with that, I'm going to pause sharing the PowerPoint here so that I can take a look at chat and also respond to your questions. So thank you. I'm just pausing here to take a peek to see what questions there might be. Okay, I am not seeing any questions. Oh, here we go. Is there a resource for virtual check-in, check-out? Yes, there is a technical assistance brief. You will find that at pbis.org, as well as all of the other resources that I shared today. The PowerPoint will be posted with the recording of this session today, And the hyperlinks in there will also get you to those resources. I see a question here from Erica. Just give me 1 second. It says, if a school established a Tier 1 MTSS team, would they also need to have a separate PBIS Tier 1 team? As a general rule, I would say not necessarily. Sometimes schools struggle, and I see in the rest of your question there, to, in a short amount of time, be able to discuss academics and behavior and SEL, for example. And so sometimes they might need to meet more than once a month and have an agenda where, one time we're going to focus on academics, next time we're going to focus on social, emotional, behavioral. I will also tell you, as a general rule of thumb, when you're talking about Tier 1, you don't want to be discussing students by name. That's not Tier 1. Tier 1 is all students, all staff, all settings of the school. And so the team wants to focus on generic, general, large cuts of data, large conversations. And so you want to have good coaching around avoiding getting into talking about kids one kid at a time. All right. I see another question here talking about funds. Yes. So here's the thing. Yes, there's lots of money coming into our system right now. That's fantastic. We have to be really careful. I'm going to say something that I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I'm hearing from some places that, folks are just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. Think about some of the messages I shared today. Rather than saying, I'm going to buy this shiny new object or this curriculum because it's the first one that popped up in my Google search, or I heard someone mention it on this webinar today, use your data. Use a process, something like the hexagon tool, to select the SEL curriculum or the initiative or whatever it is that's best going to meet your school community, and embed it into your multi-tiered system of support. And that's going to require using those core features of our multi-tiered system. Things like professional development and ongoing technical assistance. Okay, Sarah, thank you so much for putting the check in, check out hyperlink in there for distance learning. Appreciate your support. Yes, yes. First of all, if we're not already feeling overwhelmed, there is a lot. And I don't know about you, but my inbox too is filling up with folks marketing. Here's a resource, here's a tool, here's a curriculum, here's a package. So what's the one thing I would suggest? Pause. Examine what you're already doing. What's working and what isn't. We don't need to be a mile wide and an inch deep, so to speak. We don't need to have 12 things happening. Pick 2 or 3, do them really, really well. That is the way in which we're going to be able to meet needs of students. Use the process, use your data, rely on one another, team-based decision-making and problem solving. So that's more than one thing, or it might feel like it, but go slow to go fast and find a few things that are going to work really well. Other questions or comments? Okay. Well, I greatly appreciate all of you joining for the active participation in chat. I know that it's tricky when we can't all see one another. I wish you well, and don't hesitate to reach out by email if you have any questions.